Hello, Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to the 53rd edition of LUMS Live. Just a quick reminder before we begin our discussion for the day that if you've missed previous sessions of LUMS Live, they're available to stream on the LUMS Facebook page, and you can also catch them on YouTube. So please go and check out these very important conversations with some of Pakistan's best thinkers. Moving on to today's discussion, the dust is almost settled on a closely contested presidential election in the United States. Trump is out soon, hopefully, and Joe Biden will be sworn in as president in January. Unlike his predecessor, Donald Trump, who pursued an America First foreign policy and attempted to move the US outside the post-World War II multilateral status quo, Biden is expected to take a more traditionalist approach to foreign affairs, an approach that will perhaps see the US once more support the international order and focus on restoring Washington's international alliances and standing. So where does Pakistan fit into all of this? That's what we're here to discuss today. Will Biden's rise to power change in a significant way what people say has been an issue-specific and a transactional nature of the relationship Pakistan and the US have had for decades? And how can, in fact, Pakistan work to change this configuration? What kind of opportunities does the new administration present to Pakistan to strengthen its ties? So if you'll bear with me, distinguished panelists, I'd like to just very quickly give our listeners some background on the nature of ties as they stand today. It would not be wrong to say that Pakistan and the United States have long had a complicated relationship. They're officially allies in fighting terrorism, but their relationship is kind of caught on the one hand in Washington's dependence on Pakistan to supply its troops in Afghanistan, but on the other hand, over the years, ties have been strained again and again by accusations that Islamabad is playing a double game. For instance, by allowing militants, the Haqqani network, the Afghan Taliban, to target to giving them shelter on Pakistani soil, which is, of course, something that Islamabad denies. But in recent months, Pakistan has played a productive behind-the-scenes role, finding close convergence of interest for the US on the Afghan peace process, which has enabled both states to work closely to bring the Afghan Taliban to the negotiating table and eventually participate in what are ongoing intra-Afghan talks. So finally, if you remember from Trump's 2018 tweets about Pakistan's lies and deceit, we see Pakistan having earned acknowledgement for its positive role in helping the peace process forward. So that's kind of where we'll pick up our conversation today. Where do Pak-US ties go from here? And if what has bound Pakistan and the US for 20 years is the situation in Afghanistan, then how do the two countries move towards a broader relationship? And can they? We'll ask our panelists that. The risk, the fear that once the US withdrawal is complete, the US interest in the region will diminish with or without a genuine reconciliation process in Afghanistan is a real one. How afraid should Pakistan be of this possibility? To what degree will potential failure in maintaining lasting peace be problematic for the Pak-US bilateral relationship and also lead to a rollback in existing goodwill? We'll discuss this today. Then there's the question of how the new US administration will deal with the deteriorating security situation in South Asia. The US-China confrontation, growing hostility between China and India, India and Pakistan. What kind of leadership role can Biden play? Will the US weigh in on the issue of Kashmir? Will it take a more balanced approach towards India? Will it keep supporting India against China? We'll explore all these questions. We'll also look at some broader patterns, the degree of continuity we can expect from Biden compared to Trump. Will his policy towards Pakistan be similar or different? How will his past experiences VP impact his Pakistan policy? And then, of course, I'd like to ask all the panelists how they see, what kind of engagement they think we can expect from Pakistan with the US over the next 4 years. What kind of proactive steps can it take to engage? What might these steps be? So these are all huge questions, and we'll try to answer some of them with the help of our panel of very distinguished guests today, who all have direct experience dealing with Pakistani and US foreign policy. They're experts in South Asia, but particularly on the Pakistan-US equation. So in no particular order, we have with us Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani, a career diplomat who has served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the European Union, Australia. He was the Foreign Secretary of Pakistan in 2012. He's also worked as the Director General for South Asia and SAARC, as Acting High Commissioner to India, as Director India in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He is a member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council on Foreign Affairs. He served as a senior fellow at leading international think tanks, including the International Institute for Strategic Studies and the United States Institute of Peace. We have with us Ambassador Tehmina Janjua, who became Foreign Secretary in 2017, the first woman to hold the highest career position in the Pakistani Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She served as ambassador and permanent representative to UN Geneva, ambassador to Italy. She served at the UN in New York. She was also the spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry, Director General for the Strategic Planning Commission. She was the first woman and the first developing country representative to preside over the review conference of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. In 2016, she's worked with several national security advisors, foreign secretaries, and is currently a member of the Advisory Council on Foreign Affairs. We have with us Michael Kugelman, who is the Asia Program Deputy Director and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Woodrow Wilson Center, a leading specialist on Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan, and their ties with the US. He's published op-eds and commentaries in the New York Times, the LA Times, Politico, CNN, Bloomberg, et cetera, too many to name. He's also produced a number of longer publications, policy briefs, journal articles on issues ranging across South Asia. Last but not the least, we have Mosharraf Zaidi, who's a public policy professional, currently the CEO of public policy think tank Tabadla, and was previously the CEO and campaign director of Alif Ilan, which was this campaign to help address Pakistan's education crisis. He served as an advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's advised governments, international organizations on international aid, education, technology, trade. In 2014, he was a young global leader for the World Economic Forum. He writes a regular, very popular column for the news, major Pakistani newspaper, and his commentaries have appeared in the New York Times, Foreign Policy. And I am Mehreen Zara Malik. I'm Pakistan editor for Arab News, which is one of the largest English language newspapers in the Middle East. Previously served as Pakistan correspondent for Reuters, deputy editor at The News. I'm a proud LUMS alumni, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. So let's start with a broad question before we get into specifics. I'd like to start with you, Ambassador Janjua. It's said that, one of the things we keep hearing is that Biden knows Pakistan really well, that he knows Pakistan better than any other US president in history, perhaps. He's been regularly visiting Pakistan since the 90s. He was one of the principal architects of Kerry Lugar. He understands the ups and downs of Pakistani democracy, problems in governance. And he also, believes in dealing with nations through institutions rather than Trump, who had a more, kind of unilateralist, erratic approach to foreign affairs. So do you think, should all these factors lead us to believe that the relationship between the US and Pakistan will be more stable under Biden?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation to this webinar. The relationship between, firstly, I must say that as we wait for the Biden administration to come into power, we've seen a list of nominations for the cabinet that are there. And these nominations show that the Biden administration is going to be focusing more on institutions and less just the White House sort of steering foreign policy as it's been in the past. And hence we see that there may be a difference in tone, a change in tone, but we have to see how the substance of matters of interest go. And that's very important. Yes, President Biden, elect, knows Pakistan, has been to Pakistan, has been involved in a number of conversations with Pakistan. And he's surrounded by people, and Mr. Blinken, who's now being expected to be the Secretary of State, has also has been speaking about the Biden agenda in the foreign policy as well. And the focus is more on returning to multilateralism, something that is of great interest to Pakistan as well. The fact that Prime Minister Imran Khan sent a tweet on Biden's election results, which included two specific points. One on the summit on democracy, a very important thing, and it's good that the Prime Minister welcomed it and underscored the fact that corruption was going to be an important part of that summit and that we would participate in it with enthusiasm. The second most important thing that has been referred to is climate change as well, and the focus on climate change. Pakistan, as you know, is amongst the main 10 countries that are most affected by climate change, and therefore it's important that we get involved. And it's very useful to know that the U.S. administration will now be focusing back on climate as well. And thirdly, of course, the fact that the multilateralism is an important agenda for the Biden administration. There will be focus on human rights. And from our perspective, the focus on human rights means that there may be, we hope that there'll be some focus on the situation of human rights in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I have read the article that Michael Krugman has written today in the Dawn that we saw today. We may have a difference of opinion, but we hope certainly that the United States will be able to focus on these issues which are of immediate concern to Pakistan. Afghanistan will be an issue, key issues in foreign policy on which the Biden administration will focus on will be China, Iran, Afghanistan, trading, economics, democracy, and human rights. And these are areas which are close to us. I will not go further into the details of it. But one point on Afghanistan, yes, there has been a lot of momentum that was generated by the Trump administration. From what we understand, the focus on Afghanistan will remain, and that what we heard recently, an insistence on orderly withdrawal from Afghanistan is going to be the ostensible difference between Biden and Trump administrations. Biden would like to show that, unlike Trump, he's not inclined to cut and run. This implies more conditionalities on the Taliban and possibly a little more pressure on Islamabad. But as far as Islamabad is concerned, as you said earlier on, Pakistan has been very clearly working with the US. As I said to someone earlier, that on Afghanistan, when Prime Minister Imran Khan came into power, the first visit that came from the United States was from Secretary of State Pompeo, and the clear message that was sent was that there is no place for military conflict there, or no military solution, and that the results should be based on on discussions and negotiations and talking to the Taliban. So,
Master Janjua, we'll speak about Afghanistan in a lot of detail, sort of further down in the.
Okay, so I'll stop here.
Yeah. In the conversation, I think a large chunk of our conversation, in fact, will be dedicated to Afghanistan. But I wanted to ask you, Ambassador Jilani, sort of the same question, just because I want to kind of lay the ground for our listeners, the same question a little differently, on whether you expect continuity with Biden compared to Trump, and in broad terms, if his policy towards Pakistan will be similar or different, and how.
Well, thank you so much, Marine. Like Tehmina, I would also like to thank you for including me in this distinguished panel. I would say that based on our past experience of dealing with the Obama administration, of which Vice President Biden was an important part, we have reason to be optimistic about the Biden presidency. The reasons are quite obvious. As compared to Trump, President Biden or Biden administration will be more predictable, driven by a rational and a prudent approach, more civilized, and will follow a balanced policy which would be driven by a professional team of experts that he has chosen. The initial, as Tehmina, my colleague, mentioned, that the initial indications which have come from Washington, the kind of team that he has selected, like Tony Blinken or Jake Sullivan or Michelle Flournoy, who is going to be the Secretary of Defense, who is predicted to be the Secretary of Defense. They are all people who have dealt with Pakistan in the past, and they also know the limitations and also the strengths of where we stand. Having said that, we should be under absolutely no illusion that there is going to be strategic convergences between US and Pakistan. And I say this for the simple reason that in the past several years, since the 90s, we are mostly managing our relations between our two countries. Biden administration, however, will certainly be cognizant of the fact that Pakistan is an important country, and it would be in the vital interest of the US and also Pakistan to retain each other's goodwill. And this goodwill is something which is of paramount importance for both the countries for the promotion of their vital, promotion and preservation of their vital strategic interests. I think the most important thing, again, based on our experience, is that the kind of dialogue, the high-level dialogue that we had with the Obama administration, of which Mr. Biden was also an important part, that was suspended by the Trump administration. So we should expect the revival of that high-level strategic dialogue between our two countries. We should also expect an understanding on Pakistan's relationship with China, which certainly became a major issue during the Trump administration, because the Trump administration would mostly look at its relations with Pakistan through the prism of China. And accordingly, we began to face a lot of pressure on China-Pakistan economic issues, as well as other issues. We should note that this is something which is a major departure from the earlier administrations, which would look at China-Pakistan relations from a positive angle, in the sense that because of the kind of role that Pakistan played in the past in bringing about a rapprochement between the two countries. So, from that point of view, I think there is something which is going to be on a positive line. Then again, there was another important issue that we confronted during the Trump administration, and that related to Financial Action Task Force. Now, I remember that in 2015, when we were in the gray list of Financial Action Task Force, we took a number of steps, and we were removed from the FATF list. Now, again, we have, I think now, in the last 4 years, we have met most of the benchmarks related to FATF that had given to Pakistan. And I think we should expect a constructive engagement with the Biden administration on these issues. When it comes to India, again, I think despite the reputation of Mr. Biden as pro-India, we should also expect a degree of understanding to Pakistan's concerns as far as the new administration is concerned. The new administration, particularly Mr. Biden and also his team, they had played a very, very active role in the past in diffusing tension between India and Pakistan. And we should expect the revival of the same role that it played in the past in not only bringing about a rapprochement, but also encouraging both the countries to enter into a substantive and result-oriented dialogue to resolve Jammu and Kashmir dispute. So, from these angles, I think there is a lot of scope for optimism as far as the new administration is concerned.
So you've raised so many points, and I think we'll kind of try and get to some of them individually later on in our conversation. But Michael, I wanted to ask you, that kind of just taking forward what the two ambassadors have said, that would you agree that Biden takes office at a time when Pakistan is a very different country compared to when he was vice president? And the US-Pakistan relationship is also very different, as Ambassador Jilani has outlined. Could you explain for our listeners, if this is true, and also how his past experiences as VP will impact how you think, sitting in Washington, that he will approach Pakistan today?
Well, first of all, thanks, Mehreen, for including me in this timely conversation, and particularly with such a distinguished panel. Just to provide a bit of broader context, Biden will be taking office at a moment when the U.S. itself faces one of its biggest domestic crises in years. I think it's been a long time since this country has been dealing with the with three generational crises at the same time, one involving public health, the other involving the economy, and another involving society because of the racial tensions and the deep divides here. So for all we've heard about Biden being perhaps one of the most foreign policy savvy presidents this country has ever had, and also for all we've heard about this president being one of the most knowledgeable presidents about Pakistan and South Asia coming into office, initially, at least, there will be a significant focus on the home front. I mean, the pandemic, trying to get recovery from that will be a main initial priority. And one of the first things that President-elect Biden did was to form a new pandemic group to try to figure out how to move forward on that. So I think that it would be wrong to think that from the day he takes office, he's going to be thinking about the relationship with Pakistan or the relationship with anyone for that matter. But that said, to get to your question, I think I do, at least in the initial term, envision a fair amount of continuity with the Trump administration. I think that the issue of Afghanistan, which I know we'll get to later, will be one of his major focus areas. He'll want to figure out what to do about the troop posture issue, how to get involved in the peace process. And of course, once he starts getting at the Afghanistan issue, then that's going to bring him into the issue of Pakistan, because this administration, like the Trump administration, will see Pakistan as a key player, a key facilitator in these efforts to bring more momentum to what so far has been a fragile peace process. And I think the other big priority area for this administration when it starts to look at the relationship with Pakistan is on the counterterrorism front. Certainly the efforts that Pakistan has been making, and quite successfully on many levels, to deal with the concerns of the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF. That will be a big priority for the U.S. to see all that going through. But getting to your question of what to expect from this president based on what he had done, his sentiments about Pakistan back in the day, it's very interesting that Biden had been directly involved with the U.S.-Pakistan relationship at some of its very promising times and some of its very dark times. And as I think was mentioned, he was the one that spearheaded the development of the Kerry-Lugar-Berman bill, which came out at a moment when the strategic dialogue was out in full flow and there was a lot of potential for cooperation in a lot of broad spaces. But then, of course, later on in the Obama administration, the relationship didn't fall apart, but it suffered through a lot of major crises happening at the same time. In 2011 and 2012, when you had the Raymond Davis incident, of course, the bin Laden raid, the Salalah raid, which killed, as I recall, more than 20 Pakistani security forces. And things didn't really get all that much better after that. And the U.S.-Pakistan relationship during the Obama years really was not in a good place right at the very end. I mean, it certainly could have been worse, and you could argue that it got even worse during the first year of the Trump era, when security assistance was suspended and all of that. But it was not in a good place. And Biden, if you think back on his experiences with Pakistan during those years when he was vice president, there were some very, very tough times. He had been given a significant portfolio from President Obama to focus on Afghanistan. And so Biden had made a number of visits to Pakistan in which he spoke with, at the time, your army chiefs and intelligence chiefs and other key leaders. And there were some pretty difficult conversations that he had. If those of you that have read Steve Cole's Directorate S, will get a good sense as to the difficult and awkward nature of these conversations that Biden had with the likes of General Kiani and others, in which Biden seemed to be very concerned about what he perceived to be the policies that the Pakistani state was taking toward militants, including the Taliban and the Haqqani network. Now, the big question today is, to what extent have those experiences that Biden had, those not too great experiences, to what extent have they lingered in his mind, and also in the mind of his top aides that will be joining him in the administration, some of whom, such as Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, who we'll expect to be nominated as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, they were also involved in these same types of conversations and experience. So to what extent will those experiences color their views today? It's true that Pakistan has changed a whole lot since then, particularly on the issue of terrorism and so on. There have been a lot of significant efforts made to counter the terrorism threat. I really don't know. I would assume that Biden and others in the administration, they've continued to follow the region very closely, and they know that things have changed. They know that the relationship is in a different place. And I imagine that at least initially, they will be very focused on figuring out ways to ensure enough cooperation with Pakistan to ensure that they can continue to work together on the Afghanistan fronts. But I think that the relationship between the US and Pakistan is soon enough going to reach an inflection point where we're going to be seeing the day where US troops are just about all out of Afghanistan. And it's true that for several decades, US policymakers on bipartisan levels have looked at the relationship with Pakistan through the lens of Afghanistan. So what happens when the US no longer has as many stakes in Afghanistan, when it doesn't have as many troops there, when it's not as involved?
Come to that,
it needs to be on the relationship. So I'll end it right there.
Yeah. And I think we can get into Afghanistan at this point with you, Mosharraf. I was reading your column from a couple of weeks ago in the news where you quoted Joe Biden as telling Karzai in 2009 that Pakistan is 50 times more important to the United States than Afghanistan. I just wanted, do you believe that is true today? I mean, why did you quote that? Why did you use that particular quote? And what are the implications of that today? Mosharraf, you're mute. You're on mute. Unmute.
Thank you, Marine. First, as the other panelists have done, my thanks to you. And I wanted to interject right when you said it, but every good thing must come at its due time. I too am a Lumenite, a very proud one. And so it's always a pleasure to be part of the LUMS Live sessions. And this is such a fantastic panel. So well done to you and the organizers for bringing it together. I'm always enlightened listening to Madam Janjua, Sir Jilani, and Mr. Kugelman. I wanted to, I think this question about Pakistan being 50 or 100 times more important than Afghanistan. I started the article with that, but if you recall, my ending quote is the one that I wanted people to depart with. And the ending quote, of course, is Joe Biden speaking to, at that time, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, reassuring him of his country's commitment to democracy in this region. I did that because I think that the way that we see the Biden administration gets filtered through, I think, all appropriate lenses, the one that Michael has offered, the one that Madam Janjua and Jilani Sahab have offered. But I think that if you look at, for example, the choice of both Blinken and Jake Sullivan, I think that says something quite important. Susan Rice would have been her own Secretary of State. That doesn't mean Blinken won't be, but Susan Rice has a very specific ideology that shapes her approach to world affairs. And part of that is, a commitment to certain kinds of intervention. Tony Blinken is a much more, if I was to say, he's much more passive about American power. He believes that American power needs to be wielded for good, to consolidate and bring people together and mobilize people, rather than necessarily always as a means of coercion or force. Susan Rice has no hang-ups about the use of American military force. That would be one sort of interesting distinction. And if the choice does indeed end up being Blinken, I think it says a lot about how much Biden is committed to foreign policy. I think Michael's right. His number one job is going to be the pandemic. The US has badly fumbled its response to the pandemic. It is a massive crisis and it affects the rest of the world. So Biden is going to be very, very taken in by that challenge. But I do think that Blinken, the choice of Blinken says something. I think the choice of Jake Sullivan says something even more profound, because Sullivan, as I think Jilani Sahab already pointed out, was part of Hillary Clinton's policy team. That was a team of, if you will, a team of sort of policy all-stars. much in the way that the early Clinton era had produced a whole spectrum of public policy professionals that went on to dominate US foreign and domestic policy and even the discourse for many years. Similarly, I think Clinton's original foreign policy team had people like Jared Cohen, Alec and Jake Sullivan, and Anne-Marie Slaughter. I think Sullivan was probably, amongst all of them, perhaps the one most open to reconsidering the role of the United States in the world. And I think that there's a degree of self-critical American exceptionalism that he's also talked about in a piece that he did for The Atlantic recently. It's a very different kind of a vibe from the interventionist camp of the Democratic Party, led by Susan Powers and Samantha Powers and Susan Rice. It's also very different from the old school that Biden himself is from, which is kind of Lindsey Graham, the late, great John McCain, Senator, and now President-elect Biden himself, this kind of elected official supremos in the foreign policy realm. I think Sullivan represents something vastly different, and it's really interesting that he would choose him, especially given his generational gap. I mean, Jake is young enough to be one of Biden's sons. It's a vast age gap. So I think if you look at these choices, what it says about what Biden might do is to me not so much that that foreign policy won't be central to him, or that he would necessarily take the line that he did in years past. Both Blinken and Sullivan come from a tradition in US politics where America is a guiding light. So is Pakistan a more important country than Afghanistan? I think Biden is going to indicate and prove that it is. But the means that he'll use to prove it, I think, will be much more robust on issues like freedom of the press, like democracy, and also by the same token, what Pakistanis should look forward to is what that will enable is Pakistanis to turn around and demand of the same administration the same standards of behavior from other countries, whether it's Afghanistan or it's Iran, or most importantly, I think for Pakistan, whether it's India.
All right. So I think one of the things that all the panelists have mentioned in their comments so far is that the war in Afghanistan has shaped and defined Pakistan's relationship with the US. I wanted to ask you this, Madam Janjua, do you expect this to change at all under Biden, or in what way? And how can Pakistan work to change this? Sort of this issue-specific and security-centric kind of take that the US has on Pakistan.
Thank you very much. Before I move forward on that particular question that you've raised now, I'd like to sort of go back to what Mosharraf has said earlier on, and the quote he made, how he quoted President-elect Biden about 50% Pakistan, 50% more important than Afghanistan. And I must say that I read Mr. Kugelman's article in the today, and he has a different take on it. And I'm sure those who've read the article would also have a comment on it. To move on to Afghanistan itself, yes, Pakistan, unfortunately, in the past few years, Pakistan's relationship with the United States has been largely colored by the Afghan situation, and that's what's made it difficult earlier on, and perhaps got Pakistan more and more involved in the negotiating process as far as Afghanistan is concerned. What is important is that there has been a momentum that I said was generated by the Trump administration. The concern was that this momentum may be slowed down. My understanding is that Mr. Khalilzad is going to be there right up to the taking over of the new administration, and will be consulted by the new administration itself on issues relating to Afghanistan. The inter-Afghan dialogue has had its ups and downs, but is slowly moving forward. There are voices within Afghanistan that have clearly said that they would support the process, including Mr. Abdullah. The concern, of course, is as far as Afghanistan is concerned, and for us is a major concern, are the spoilers within Afghanistan, which would would have a big impact on Pakistan as well, because obviously these spoilers are not in favor of the negotiation process on the Indo-Afghan dialogue, and has been evident in the many attacks that have taken place in the recent past. What's important is what Mosharraf has also pointed out is the different type of leadership in Blinken and Sullivan, i.e. the leadership that is underscored by President-elect Biden's point that he made in his paper where he said no endless wars. And as far as Afghanistan is concerned, this is a clear indication of what the United States would want to do even under Biden, when and that is a continuity of what the Trump administration was doing. But for us, we have always said that there should be an orderly withdrawal, which is going to be a slight difference between Biden and the Trump administrations. Biden would like to show, unlike Trump, that he's not inclined to cut and run. This implies more conditionalities on the Taliban and therefore more pressure on the Taliban, and of course a demand, expectation that Pakistan can help out in this regard. We have our limitations with the Taliban as well, as everyone knows. This may create some difficulties in the negotiating process, but the overall objective of securing an orderly withdrawal is something where Washington will find Pakistan on the same page. We would hope that we can go in our relationship with Afghanistan, with the United States beyond Afghanistan. And we would hope that our relationship would be the revival, as Mr. Jilani said, of the strategic dialogue, which has these 6 different working groups, through which substantive work was done in the past as well. I would plead with my American colleagues and also Michael Kugelman's comment that we should be looking at small results in the context of education, IT, etc., and lesser on the strategic level. But we believe that our relationship is such, and we should be having these discussions with the US administration now that we move from just the leadership contact, we hope to more substantive institutional contacts with the United States administration, that we'll be able to have more discussions on a wide area on which we've had some good results in the past as well. The 6 areas of the strategic dialogue are critical, I believe. And therefore, I believe we should move beyond Afghanistan, maybe a little difficult in the initial period, understand that the Biden administration may be focusing on its internal issues. But I think we need to have these conversations earlier on with the US new administration on trying to revive these areas. And then, of course, I agree completely with Jilani Saab that we should look at how we can work with the US administration on dealing with this issue of Fatah, where Pakistan has done a great amount of work and where we need to be heard in Washington.
So, Ambassador Jilani, if you could also just kind of take forward what Madam Janjua has been talking about. I mean, and this is also, one of our listeners has asked this question that, what is Islamabad's value for Washington? What will, in your opinion, what will keep Washington interested in Islamabad once Afghanistan? If you could also talk a little bit about that, please.
Well, Marine, I entirely agree with the other panelists have pointed out about Afghanistan. I think this is for the first time in the last 2 years that Pakistan and the United States have developed convergences in respect of Afghanistan. The peace process is moving forward, but at the same time, we should not be under any illusion that the war is not over. There are some significant difficulties which are being encountered by the Afghan parties in making progress as far as the intra-Afghan dialogue is concerned. There are also reports of external powers who were not in favor of the peace process and who felt that the space that they had acquired in Afghanistan, they are likely to lose that space. They are also now trying to help all those elements within Afghanistan who are not in favor of the peace process. There are militias which are being developed in Afghanistan with the support of external actors, mainly India. So from that point of view, when the difficulties are going to come and the war is not going to be over, the American troops are going to be withdrawn. The bulk of the responsibility is going to lie on Pakistan's shoulder. So what does it mean? It means that US and Pakistan will have to interact more closely at a higher level. High level interaction would be required because the coming days are fraught with a lot of challenges. There are challenges in respect of Afghanistan. There are challenges in respect of Iran. If we have to believe the statement of intent by President-elect Biden that he would like to revive the JCPOA, again, that is going to have several kind of difficulties. And Pakistan's role would be very critical. Similarly, in respect of China, because we believe that unlike the Trump administration's policy of taking this US-China tension to new height, the Biden administration is likely to manage its strategic competition with China in a manner that it follows a two-track approach. One track where it competes with China on strategic issues, but at the same time, on the other track, it cooperates with China on important issues like for instance, regional security, climate change, nuclear non-proliferation, which is, by the way, of significant interest to President-elect Biden, and also on health issues. So these are important issues on which they will have to engage the Chinese leadership. So from all these point of view, I think probably the perception in the United States of America that Pakistan in the Chinese camp and that you have to make new alliances with India, I think that probably mindset will have to be changed and more cooperative arrangement will have to be worked out between countries of the region, mainly Pakistan and the United States of America. I have been part of the high-level dialogue in the past, and I think there was a lot of utility and there was a lot of benefit that were accrued to both the countries, the United States of America and Pakistan. Similarly, I think there are many other issues on which Pakistan's help and cooperation would be needed. One is obviously the regional security issues. US would be interested in a stable South Asia. Pakistan also wants a stable South Asia. Pakistan would like to engage with India in a meaningful dialogue, provided they revert to pre-5th August 2019 decision, because that is something which is critical. Obama administration, President-elect Biden, they were directly involved with Pakistan on issues related to South Asia and Afghanistan, as has been rightly pointed out by our dear friend Michael. But I think that would require more, closer engagement of the kind that we had in the past.
Michael, you spoke about, the need for a responsible sort of drawdown. The White House appears to already be accelerating its drawdown. The announcement that the number of US will be cut to 2,500 by January 15 has kind of created fresh uncertainty over the situation that will inherit. And, of course, there's warnings that the country will plunge into, further upheaval, etc. So what do you think that would mean for Pakistan and for Pakistan-US ties?
Well, it's interesting that I and others have said that there's going to come a time when we'll need to identify a new basis for a U.S.-Pakistan relationship that's been tethered to Afghanistan for so long. But I think the answer to your question indicates that maybe we're not at that point yet, right? Even though the U.S. is on its way out of Afghanistan, the implications of that withdrawal from Afghanistan will have clear implications for Pakistan and by extension for US-Pakistan relations. So maybe we're putting the cart before the horse to say that we're only going to be looking at the relationship through a broader lens without any recourse to what's happening in Afghanistan. Well, look, I know that for US policymakers, a big focus area to be thinking about moving forward is indeed how will US interests be secured once US forces have, for the most part, left Afghanistan. And I think that for the incoming Biden administration, the major priority will be on how to maintain some type of US counterterrorism capacity in the country. I mean, as you know, Biden for a long time has looked at Afghanistan through the lens of counterterrorism. He has never been interested in the whole, nation building thing or so on and so forth. He may have been handed a bit of a fait accompli by the outgoing president in that Biden will enter office with a very small number of troops, 2,500. And perhaps for Biden, he would conclude that that's a sufficient number of troops to meet the criteria of his counterterrorism capacity. But that'll be a big priority for the Biden administration, is to figure out how to ensure a counterterrorism capacity. Would it be with 2,500 troops that stay on the ground? Perhaps, but of course the Taliban wants all US troops out. Or would the Biden administration seek to base a small US troop presence in some other country, perhaps Uzbekistan or some other country, not Pakistan, but some other country, and try to ensure US counterterrorism interest in that regard? It's unclear. That remains to be seen. But certainly I do think that because Biden will be, I think, he'll be trying to be more strict with the Taliban. I do think that he will try to push the Taliban harder to agree to some type of violence reduction arrangement, which could possibly entail threatening to slow down, if not stop altogether, the withdrawal of the remaining US forces in the country until the Taliban agrees to a violence reduction plan or a ceasefire. You could have that, but either way, I think that if the Biden administration concludes that its efforts to get results along those lines, getting the Taliban to agree to lower its violence, or also to distance itself from Al-Qaeda, which is a key criteria, a key commitment that the Taliban has in its agreement with the US. If Biden concludes that those efforts are not going well, and if his administration concludes that Pakistan's efforts to work with the Taliban, to pressure the Taliban to do that, if he concludes that that hasn't gone well, that could impact the US-Pakistan relationship for the worse, even though I think that's not fair to Pakistan, because I do agree with what a number of observers and officials have said in Pakistan, that Pakistan's leverage over the Taliban exists, but that it's limited, and the Taliban has all kinds of leverage itself. It doesn't necessarily need to listen to what those are asking it to do. So if Afghanistan were to really be in a bad place, and if its instability were to rise, if it falls apart, clearly there would be significant spillover impacts for Pakistan. And when you talk about cross-border instability, cross-border terrorism, drug trade, refugee flows, that type of thing. And certainly I would imagine that if the Taliban is able to make many advances and capture territory and threatens power, that could embolden extremists in Pakistan as well. And if that all happens, that could impact US-Pakistan relations for the worse as well, because Islamabad would rightly see that as an indication of the US essentially leaving the region once again, just like it did several decades earlier, leaving the region, including Pakistan, to its fate. I know this is a strongly held view there. So indeed, the relationship could be in a bad state if that were to happen. If there is success, if a peace process moves forward leading to an agreement, I think that could be a great thing for US-Pakistan relations. It create a lot of room for cooperation, but I think that's more of a long shot. So final word on this. I think that we need to look at this US-Pakistan relationship through a much broader, more unconventional lens. And I get into this in the piece that Ambassador Janjua kindly referred to that's in Dawn today. I think it's time to try to leverage the non-official channels of US-Pakistan relations. About a decade ago, Mark Grossman, who at the time was the US Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, he said that 90% of US-Pakistan relations take place through official channels. Why not try to broaden it? Why not try to engage key unofficial groups, the diaspora here, the business sector, try to promote more cooperation in areas like clean energy and IT and climate change, other areas. That can build trust for the broader relationship between the two sides, but it also sort of can occur outside of the official channels where it's just harder to get things done, where things tend to be dominated by security issues, where the tensions arise, and so on. So I think it would be nice to look at this relationship through a happier lens, where you look at these broader issues of cooperation occurring outside of official channels. I think there hasn't been enough of that, but I think there's a lot of potential.
Mosharraf, you looked like you wanted to interject and add to this.
Oh, I just have a cantankerous face. That's just my general.
Oh, okay. No, so I mean, so if like I think unless you have something more to add on Afghanistan, I'd like to move on to China for a little bit. Ambassador Janjua spoke about China, and so did Ambassador Jilani, and that whole dynamic. So, do you think that America's alleged desire to blunt the Belt and Road Initiative and contain China's rise means that its strategic and geopolitical interests in this region will remain more aligned with India rather than Pakistan during the Biden presidency? And is this something you see changing under the new administration?
So my argument for a long time has been rather similar to what I characterize as the American centrist position on Pak-China relations. And that is that actually the US is most benefited by a Pakistan that takes full advantage of its proximity and intimacy with China, but also is connected to and responsive, connected with and responsive to US needs, and when it makes sense for Pakistan, US demands. I think that sort of very delicate and intricate balance is difficult. I think it's possible, and that is really when Pakistan is firing at all cylinders. The potential of any kind of magic to affect the United States so massively that it would alter the calculus of Washington with respect to India is next to zero. So I'll repeat, it doesn't matter whether it's Trump or Biden or Obama or Kennedy or Nixon. And I think Nixon I say because maybe that would have been Pakistan's best bet. But it doesn't matter which one of those it is or whatever comes in the future. The size of the Indian economy, the potency of the Indian diaspora in a much more different way than Israel or Armenia, who are lobbying sort of behemoths in Washington, but who don't have an organic influence on the direction of US foreign policy, the direction of US domestic policy. The Indian diaspora is foundationally different in that regard. And I think that, so the issue for Pakistan is not so much to compete with India or to try and pose itself either as an opponent of the United States because it's opposed to India's occupation of Kashmir and its brutality against minorities within India. And it's also not to necessarily try to over the United States by opposing China. The best outcome for Pakistan is to do whatever it needs to do to engage China in the best way possible, which is slightly better than what it does right now in terms of the speed and the effectiveness of things like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, whilst also making sure that it is the most reliable partner to the United States for the things that the United States is interested in this region for. And principally, whether there's any troops in Afghanistan or not, the challenge of counterterrorism is going to remain. The more that the Pakistani and US authorities are cooperating on fighting Daesh, on making sure that Afghanistan and Central Asia are free of the scourge of Daesh and other terrorist groups, all the kind of different remnants of Al-Qaeda, that would be the starting point of the relationship. And I think Michael's absolutely right. Pakistan's foreign policy establishment is long overdue for a renewal and a refresher. Fresh thinking, new areas, a greater role for commerce and trade. Those are all things that Pakistan needs to do. But the initiation of that if it comes from the US, like it did under Holbrooke, is going to go nowhere. Because the benefit in all of those areas, the larger benefit, the greater gain is Pakistan's. So the initiative, the creativity, the structuring of deals, the imagination, all of those things need to come from Pakistan. And sadly, given the way that Pakistan conducts its foreign policy and how limited of an investment it makes in its foreign policy, it's unlikely that Pakistan is going to be able to do that.
So, Ambassador Jilani, what about you? I mean, do you think that Biden will keep supporting India against China, or do you think that unlike Trump, he'll take some steps to restore the US's role as a strategic balancer between Islamabad and New Delhi? Can we expect like a more delicate kind of approach?
No,
Well,
I'll go by, sorry.
No, it's you. I didn't
Was it me?
Two ambassadors.
Well, I would say that, I will go by what President-elect Biden has already said. He has said that he would want to have a stable world. So stability would require an engagement with China. And that is something that has been articulated by President-elect Biden on so many occasions. Coming back to some of the points that were raised by Michael, that Pakistan would probably, US-Pakistan relations could again go bad in case the Taliban do not fulfill some of the, or do not reduce violence. I would say that, there is a limit to the kind of pressure that can be exerted on the Taliban. I say this because I remember the time when Pakistan put a lot of pressure on the Taliban in 2015, 2015. The Taliban, they decided to go towards Russia. They decided to go towards Iran. As a matter of fact, the Taliban leadership had shifted their base from Pakistan to Iran. So the US certainly would not like to have a situation whereby the whatever little leverage that Pakistan has vis-a-vis Taliban, that also disappears. With regard to China-Pakistan economic corridor, I would say that the hype that we witnessed with regard to CPEC, that is also that is the outcome of the hype that we witnessed between US and Pakistan, US and China, that was created by the Trump administration. As regards Biden administration is concerned, we never felt any pressure on China-Pakistan economic corridor, either at the time when I was foreign secretary or during my stay in Washington. At that time, the Obama administration would only encourage us to make progress on this Belt and Road Initiative on China-Pakistan economic corridor, in the hope that at some stage, US would also like to come and join this China-Pakistan economic corridor once the infrastructure is completed and once the industrial zones are set up, when the American companies will have an opportunity to invest in these ventures. Again, this is something which is, I have very strong reason to believe that that Biden administration will review its policy vis-a-vis China. They would like to engage with China on economic issues. And the kind of pressure that we faced on China-Pakistan economic corridor in the last 4 years, that is also going to be receded under the Biden administration.
Yeah, I would just add to that, and just reinforcing all of that, Marine, and say that Ambassador Jilani is absolutely right. In fact, I think the pressure that we saw was probably it wasn't a whole of system choice. I think Alice Wells and a couple of others within the State Department probably had more to do with that positioning than any grand conspiracy or grand compact within the United States that Pakistan is the pivot point to help contain China. I don't think that's true at all.
Ambassador Janjua, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I agree with both Mosharraf and Ambassador Jilani that there was a more individualized perception of the Pakistan-China relationship, as well as on CPEC, which sort of got pronouncements in Washington as well. And I agree with the Ambassador Jilani that the problem was not that, the question of CPEC was not that strongly felt in Washington under the Obama administration. It just came to be a major point when relations, it appeared when relations between Washington and New Delhi became better. But I would imagine that the United States would want Pakistan to be economically stable. And as a result of, and to see, and for us, we need to look at the development of our economic zones under CPEC, which would invite Western companies to come invest as well. And therefore, there'll be a more inclusive process. Your question whether United States would act as a balancer between India and Pakistan, my response to that would be yes, as far as the United States is concerned. The policy towards China may not be as virulent, if I may say so, quote unquote, as it is right now. Kissinger has also advised Biden to take a closer look and to find ways of cooperation with China. And he's even warned that if this is not done, it could end into a situation which could be that, like unfortunately, like the World War II or whatever, World War I, he said. It is likely that the US, in trying to compete with China, will focus on building coalitions and alliances. And in this context, India would figure prominently. But there are significant weaknesses in an India-centric approach. And this is in response to what Michael has also written in his article. First, Indian capacity to counter China, even with ramped up US support, is limited. Secondly, India will be difficult, if not an ambivalent ally, given its self-perception of being a great power, which must retain strategic autonomy. Thirdly, and most problematically, for an administration that will be more committed to human rights and democracy, will be considering India's continuing descent into Hindutva brand of proto-fascism, if I may say so, will cause difficulties in Washington. But then we have seen in the past that Washington has been able to work well with authoritarian regimes. We hope this will not be possible in the context of India, and that there'll be a greater focus on the situation within India itself. As for the foundational documents that have been signed in the last few years under President Trump, those do give indicators and do provide the path that Washington would take as far as the strategic relationship is concerned. But we hope that having moved from individualized foreign policy to more institution-based foreign policy, there will be possibilities of discussions on all these areas, and there will be more open discussions at all levels with the US administration, between Pakistan and the US administration by the Foreign Office. I agree that we need to focus on economic opportunities in Washington, and a bit is being done. I would not be as pessimistic as Mosharraf is, but yes, we need to do a little more in the context of economic cooperation with the United States. But we need to have discussions with the new administration, laying out clearly some kind of a plan, a roadmap, as far as we see, our government sees relations with Washington is concerned. So yes, India will remain important for the United States, but in the relationship with India also has its difficulties and problems, and we need to, and there are lots of areas that we can identify with the new administration in Washington, which could be areas of convergences, and I've sort of highlighted them earlier. Thank you.
So we've got about 5-6 minutes to go, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Kashmir. Michael, you're muted. This is a question that a couple of social media users have asked in different ways, and I'll paraphrase it, which is that Biden has come out in support of Kashmiris. He's compared the plight of Muslims in Kashmir with the Rohingya in Bangladesh or with the Muslims in China. And in a statement published in June this year, he said that New Delhi should restore the rights of the Kashmiris. kind of revoke Article 370, after India revoked Article 370. So do you think that his declared policy on Kashmir during the election campaign will become the official stance of his government? Will he walk the talk?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I know an important one in Pakistan. Well, certainly, I think it's very clear that this administration will be much more willing than its predecessor to bring up the Kashmir issue. I think that's quite clear. And I think many of you will recall several months back, Antony Blinken, who's probably going to become the Secretary of State, that he said in public remarks that, yes, Biden will bring up this issue. And he said, he couched it in a way that he essentially suggested that it's important for close partners to have difficult conversations. And we look forward to doing that with the Kashmir issue. And not just the Kashmir issue, but he also mentioned the citizenship law in India, the very controversial citizenship law. So I think that, yes, it will be broached, but the question is, what does that really mean? How far would the Biden administration be willing to take this issue? Well, if you look at Kashmir through a rights lens, which of course is just one way to look at it, I think that's where you could assume that this administration that's how it would frame the issue. One of the major pillars of the Biden administration's foreign policy, as we're told, is to strengthen democracy and human rights. So I think that we could have not just necessarily Biden, but other senior officials in private conversations with Indian interlocutors, bringing up concerns about Kashmir from a human rights lens. I do not expect at all anyone in the Biden administration to actually bring up Kashmir as a territorial dispute and try to push India to rethink its decision to repeal Article 370. That's not somewhere that the Biden administration is going to go. It's not where any U.S. administration would want to go, just because of the dynamics of the U.S.-India relationship and not wanting to undermine it. Now, certainly, given how high a priority Biden appears to be putting this issue of democracy and rights, if he's perceived as sort of muting criticism of India about other things that it does in Kashmir to oppress Kashmiris, if he's perceived as not going as far as he should, that could undercut, I would argue, his foreign policy agenda, given that he, unlike Trump, appears to really want to put a premium on this issue of rights promotion. But now, bottom line answer to the question is that I don't think that we should overstate just how far the Biden administration would go in trying to push India on Kashmir. I think that there could be some gentle criticism, some gentle comments about the rights situation, but I don't really think that this administration is going to push hard. It's going to look at its relationship with India through the lens that all U.S. administrations look at their key relationships with, and that's, realpolitik, cold hard interests, and those will prevail any day. So I don't mean to end that on a downer, but I'm just trying to be practical in terms of how I see this going.
So I had so many more questions on the Middle East, on trade and FATF, and a bunch of other things, but the LUMS people are nudging me to wrap this up. Maybe we'll have a second part of this discussion, because genuinely so many more questions. It's been a really wonderful discussion. I thank you all for joining us. I think it's safe to say that all of us are kind of looking at Biden's victory with cautious optimism, and kind of with this understanding that Islamabad now has to work very hard to ensure that it makes the most of this change of leadership and balances its expectations versus reality. So that's all from me for today, folks. Thank you all for being here. And until next time, Khuda Hafiz and good evening.